and especially people of color. We do seminars, we do webinars, we do conferences, and we work with churches and other non-profit organizations just to be sure that we have things on track with families. We believe strongly that when families are okay, when families are, in a good place, our society will be in a good place, and that's our nation. It's my utmost privilege and honor to partner with Joshua Elbers and Lawrence Lewis to host this event. Thank you very much. Over to you, Joshua.
Are you muted, Josh? Go ahead.
This is going to be a panel discussion for all of you guys that are joining us today. And we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. Now that we have everybody that's on the panel introduced, I'm going to go ahead and start the first question off with Mr. Lawrence Lewis. In 1 to 2 minutes, please give me your thoughts on the role that police officers play in society today.
I probably won't need more than about 10 seconds. For me, it's a simple role. The police protect the sheep from the wolves. That's it.
Okay, okay, that was a pretty simple answer.
Should I tell you who the wolves are? Obviously, Detective Washington and I'm very grateful that Detective Washington has decided to come on and be with us and share his experiences. He and I met when I was defending folks charged with murder, and he had either played a role in the investigation or was the lead investigator. So Detective Washington and I probably spent about 15 years together in the courtroom trying to figure out who was responsible for somebody. I'm talking about who are charged with the major crimes, the murders, the armed robbery, the kidnappings, the trafficking in children for sexual servitude. Those are the folks that I call the wolves in society, and ultimately the police protect the sheep from the wolves. Who are the sheep? The other folks that really have no clue what's going on. So that's what I think the role of the police is.
Okay, thank you so much for that. On the same question, on to Mr. Ramey.
Yeah, I'll watch my new watcher.
No, but you got everybody. That's the good one.
Well, I would just agree with Mr. Lewis that is the role of the police officer in society, is to protect those who can't otherwise protect themselves. To some form, be the external compass, moral compass for what people lack on the inside. That's why we have to have police officers in society, to keep things in some form of decency and order, so we can enjoy our daily lives without fear of being attacked by anybody else.
That's a good answer. That's a great answer, actually. Special Agent Washington, did you want to add anything on to that?
No, I think they covered it.
And Dr. Fisher.
Well, I think part of the issue to look at here is it's an extremely difficult job, as I see it, because as we get into more complexities in culture, we have more complexities in how do you identify who is who in the accurate identification of sheep and wolves, as well as, again, the roles that people are playing at different levels of our culture, of the structure of the policing agencies. And then we have to look at the psychology of people, because I think we have a lot of issues going on that police, even in some ways, are parents to some in some communities. They are big brothers. They are the agents that are examining things. They're preventers of problems as they may see them coming, and they are the unfortunate enforcers. And because there's so many overlaps in the different roles that people play, it's extremely hard to understand the complexities. And then they're also players of the game. And what I mean by that is that we have to look at that our justice system in so many ways is an unfortunate game where we're trying to make sure that people who have committed crimes are paying the price. But it's really, to me, about, it has to be about learning and growing from the mistakes we make, not just about punishment. And when you're put in a role to police and enforce, and you have these more hierarchical structural views of this is the way it is, follow these rules, versus I think a lot of times officers see when they know the people, and they should, to me, know their community, they see that this method of being so authoritarian won't work. They need guidance, or some people do need structure. We have to have room to understand the people in community, the parents, the officers, the people who are in charge of those agencies, to really work together more collaboratively. So in that way, I think we can look at, real simple answers. But my frustration as an outside viewer of the system, in having done testimony and having seen the policing issue, is really understanding the concept of how do we navigate this game so everybody wins? Because I think when the police feel like they're losing, that raises a whole nother level of issues of, can they do their job? And can they feel confident and be able to do their job successfully to look out for our best interest?
Yeah, and I completely understand what you mean by that. It's based off of the, what's been going on, in the country, post George Floyd, and even before, with other cases that have made the headlines. It brings me into my next statistic that I wanted to share with the panel here. When we look at what's going on in society in terms of not just police shootings, but the amount of people that are dying from gun violence, whether it be homicide or suicide, and even, I have this on here just to show, the major difference in the numbers. I know that it's a different form of how people are dying, but overdose deaths. And to see that the amount of people that are dying from overdoses is significant. A new number came out today that I don't have on the screen that goes up all the way to 71,000 people for the year of 2019. But when we're looking at the rate of police-related killings by race, you see that right here, you have a lower amount of people, but the amount per million is higher than it is for a Caucasian versus an African American male. So, speaking on these statistics, I want to start with Officer Ramey. What kind of things or behaviors make you as a law enforcement officer nervous when you're interacting with a suspect or a person of interest, whether it be pulling somebody over or somebody that's in the jail, somebody that's, you're investigating? And I want to then, after you answer that, point that over to Special Agent Washington, and then to Mr. Lewis, and then we'll end it with Dr. Fisher.
The things that make me nervous when dealing with an individual is not so much related to race, not even the sex, but the non-responsive individual, the one who either won't answer, won't cooperate, or if they're giving an answer, it's one where it seems to have nothing, and it winds up being more of a, I guess when I get into dealing with mental health issues, that's my greatest concern. That the next individual is the one who has an issue with the police officer from the beginning, no matter how nice, how decent I am being toward that person. The person who just seems to be determined to be defiant and rather just let me do my job. So hopefully I can get this thing resolved right there on the spot and we go about our business. That individual causes me the greatest concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramey. Mr. Washington?
Yes, there are a lot of factors that come into play when you talk about police interacting with people and the signs that someone may or may not resist or may offer some type of violence during that encounter. The biggest thing is when a person is not responding to your orders or commands to do something. Turn around, put your hands behind your back, sit down, whatever orders you may be giving. If that person is not responsive to that, those are all indicators and signs that there may be some type of oncoming attack or fight, or some type of medical issue at play.
All right. And Dr. Fisher?
I think you're bringing up extremely valid issues with mental health and understanding each approach. Before I continue, can everybody who's not on the panel please mute your phones or iPads or everything? There's sounds of cars in the background and things, so it's cutting in. Just want to make sure that everybody else is, make sure we do that. Because I think, again, when we look at the issue of mental health, I can understanding just being a police officer can feel very scary. You have to look in charge. You want to make sure that you're professional, you're respectful, as well as, again, understanding all the dynamics of any situation. And when police officers may not understand aspects of mental health, there's an element of training, but it really requires an in-depth level of training. Is this person psychotic? Are they sociopathic? Are they having anxiety? Do they have post-traumatic stress? I can tell you personally that I've had a couple of people through my 30 years of doing work who, because of their post-traumatic stress, reacted in ways against an officer that resulted in them getting more further attacked and compounding their stress. There's so many factors that have to be looked at that we have to be careful not to just make a blanket statement about people who we judge to be criminals and people who we say are bad officers, because that's not true. Every situation is unique. So I think in that, the level of stress and respect, I think we need to acknowledge of every officer out there in the job they do, of what brought them to that job, their history, of the history of the person that they're in interaction with, and those two colliding sometimes of those two events of the history of the individual and the history of the officer. I think that to me is critical in really examining this whole issue of why we're having the structural issues and behavioral issues and outcomes with policing these days.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Very thorough answer. The next question that I have, and I want to start with Mr. Washington. Do you think that police officers are different from the general population? How so and why?
Well, the doctor can speak to this more eloquently than I could, but in its simplest terms, of course not. Because police are a part of the general population, just like everyone else. The only thing that separates them from everyone else is the profession that they choose. And the intimate interactions and access that they have to the underbelly of society that happen in our communities that no one else sees. The crime, the fatalities and traffic accidents, the domestic violence, those are the only things that separate police from the general population. So no, they're not different.
Mr. Lewis, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think for me, it starts with who ultimately chooses to be a police officer. I think there are a lot of different motives behind why ultimately people become police officers. Some people become police officers, only stay police officers for a very short time. Other people become police officers and obviously make a career out of it. There's nothing, I don't think there's any one thing that you can point to that'll say this person is going to be a good police officer or this person is not going to be a good police officer. But what I can say, and I saw that Kyle Jones has joined us, is that I've learned in sort of having conversations post George Floyd that either the screening process or the training process has to weed out those people who are very comfortable with revenge. What's that mean? If we get into a fight and I put handcuffs on you and you're sort of under control, I'm still not sort of shifting my mindset into a preservation of life mindset, which is the term that Kyle Jones gave to me. I'm still in the, we're fighting mindset. And so when you say I can't breathe, I say, so what? You shouldn't have started fighting with me in the first place. So I think that mentality is something that has to, that when you start talking about screening, you have to screen for that mentality. When you start talking about training, you have to recognize that that the officer that fights with the person that gets them under control, that person might have to be tapped out, and then somebody else has to step in and then assume control of the situation once the person has handcuffs on them. I think it's just going to be about, I know I wouldn't make a good police officer. I already know that, you understand? Because if somebody passes me a little bit too fast, too close on the highway, I'm chasing them. I mean, it's just a mentality. And so you have to begin, some people don't understand themselves well enough to know that about themselves. Some people just shouldn't be police officers because they don't have the ability to shift like that. I chase, I fight with you, and then I turn into a person that life. That's not even how my mind works. And that's what I look for with a police officer.
And you bring up a good point. It brings me into a follow-up question for you, Dr. Fisher. Do you think that police officers should either, one, need more educational background before they're able to become a police officer?
See you next time.
If everyone could, if the people that are not talking, if you could please mute your microphone.
Okay, Josh, hold on. I'm going to mute everybody and then I'll unmute the panelists. I've done this a couple of times. I don't know why some people keep on muting themselves. But please do respect us. And if you are having a side conversation, please do not unmute yourself except you have absolutely a reason to answer a question. Please, let's respect each other. Thank you. Hold on, panelists. I'm going to mute everybody and then I'll unmute only you guys.
Okay, and so that's my follow-up question, Dr. Fisher, that Mr. Lewis brought up a good point. Do you think that it should be necessary or recommended that maybe law enforcement should have a higher degree of education before they enter the force, as well as maybe a mental health and psychological evaluation? I know that those things are already present, but do you think that maybe a more thorough evaluation in mental health and psychology for, prospective law enforcement officers should be required?
I think, to me, the evaluative process is really the most critical up front. I know in what I do, and you all each may know in your profession, that there are some people who are just more gifted and more able without necessarily the education. It's in their bones, to do what they know how to do and do it well. And if we can look at each officer and each level of law enforcement, each level of the law enforcement system as being an investment in our community. The time we put into people up front is critical to the outcomes we get. It's the same investment we make in our teachers that we have to see. And I'm going to bring this across because, to me, we have to see the overlap between the education our kids are getting from when they're young, that they're spending a lot of times, more times in the schools, and how are our teachers teaching in terms of helping kids to understand themselves emotionally, relationally, socially, and how are families then engaged in that, then all the way to the law enforcement system that is supposed to be able to guide, not to control. So as we look at these pieces from a bottom up, and then we look at the idea of screening properly, and then when we see issues, not just negating somebody because they might not meet a certain threshold. There's some thresholds that, yeah, somebody might not be appropriate. There are other thresholds in terms of testing that may be educational in nature. So you focus your education on somebody like Lawrence talked about how, you know, you don't think you'd be a good police officer because of X, Y, or Z. However, in certain situations, you may be the right person. So it may be that we have to, from a training standpoint, help you to understand your issues of approach to power. And that's what all this is really about, is the ways we approach power and our emotions that we respond with and how we view them. Because at that level, then education becomes part of what we do to implement a better across the board and having that spectrum of people with different skill sets rather than having one size fits all.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to jump right in to another question here. And this might be a controversial question, but it is one that has been popping up a lot on social media, in the community. There's this term that somebody driving while black has become an issue in society, to where it's seen almost as a stigma that some young African-American males and females are afraid that because they are African-American, that they have a higher risk of getting into a confrontation with a police officer. I want to start off this question with Mr. Washington, just based off of your experience in law enforcement. What do you think that this term means? And do you think that it is a valid fear for young African-American people, or African-American people in general, to feel when they're getting pulled over by a law enforcement officer?
Is he allowed to answer that question personally also?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Since he's black and he drives.
Yeah, so obviously, to Mr. Lewis's point, I am black and I do drive, and I have been stopped by the police a few times. That is a term that people use, and unfortunately, there are some places in this country where people will feel that and have a valid point based on statistics, based on investigations, based on data that's compiled over many years. But to the opposite side of that point, Josh, I would say the best thing that you can do whenever you're driving a vehicle is make sure that you are abiding by the rules of the road, making sure that you have your driver's license, making sure that it is not suspended, making sure that you don't have a warrant for your arrest, that your tag light is not out, your tail light's not out, you don't have any drugs in your car, that you don't have any guns that don't belong to you or that are stolen in your vehicle. These are all different types of things that you can make sure that if you encounter police, that the encounter goes as it should. At some point in time, it's likely that you'll be stopped by the police for speeding, for running a red light, for failing to signal. But that's the job of the police to enforce the law, to enforce the rules of the road. And it's your job as a responsible citizen to prepare yourself for that encounter with law enforcement. So here's what I do when I get stopped by the police. I roll down all my windows because I have 10 on my windows. I turn on the dome light if it's dark outside. I put on my 4-way flashers to make sure that police officers know that I acknowledge their presence. I slow my speed. I pull into a well-lit area, i.e. a gas station parking lot, somewhere that's safe off the roadway if I'm able to do so. I go ahead and get my driver's license out of my wallet because I know that's the first thing the police officer is going to ask for, so that I'm not fidgeting and looking around in my car when the officer is standing next to the window. And the most important thing is I'm courteous to the officer. You can, like the old folks say, you get more with sugar and honey than you do with salt and vinegar. So I don't have an attitude with the police. I'm not yelling and screaming, asking them why they pulled me over. I'm sure they're going to let me know that once they make their introduction. And I have been cited by the police, but I'm still sitting here before you today. So everything went okay. And no, police don't know what I do unless I tell them.
You ever had an issue with the police that you felt like you should have made a complaint or filed a complaint?
I would say no, but also I have been stopped by police officers that I thought personally weren't as professional, as kind as I may have been, or, you know, I would have hoped that they would be. But again, police officers are just like any other person in society. Sometimes you have good days, sometimes you have bad days. That doesn't mean that you did something illegal to me. It just may mean that you weren't as courteous as you should have been. So to answer your question, no, Mr. Lewis.
Do you think, and I'm just gonna assume control for 1 second, Josh. Do you think, because this is what I always thought, Detective Washington, that police officers will enforce traffic violations because the person is sort of violating the traffic law, but they suspect that there may be other things going on, like there may be a warrant, or there may be there may be other things going on. Did you ever get that sense that that's why they enforce? I'm a speeder, so we just got to get that out. So they don't stop me and I know exactly why they pulling me over, because I'm a speeder. But I'm saying generally, like if you trying to obey the speed limit, you're trying to obey the law, do police pull people over for traffic violations to sort of verify that there's nothing else going on?
So, well, the initial stop has to be for something, be it a tag light, a tail light, a lane violation, speeding, following too closely, driving too slow, not having your headlights on, a cracked windshield, a busted tail light. There are hundreds of things that police officers can make a stop for. But if you're investigating crime, which is the primary job of every police officer in this country, using a traffic stop as the initiation of an investigation, they're well within their legal limits to do that. So you can stay out of the way of that by making sure that everything in your vehicle is legitimate.
Well, I think you've given a great kind of tutorial on, you know, what to do correctly when you get pulled over by a police officer. And I think that was one of the missions for this actual panel, is to kind of educate parents, people, adolescents, young people, to understand, you know, what it is that needs to happen when you get pulled over and how to try to prevent, I guess, these escalations.